there's a group of whistleblowers, the World Bank whistleblowers, and so we're the functional Toto. So we have pulled the curtain back, and now the whole world is looking, as Dorothy was looking, to see the banking cartel that's really in the secret global control and asking for everybody to look at the projection screen, which is the mainstream media.
I brought up the idea of the disc, okay? And the disc is when we were born here on the planet, each of us has an empty disc, all right? And onto that disc goes every thought, every observation, every emotional reaction, every experience that we have, children all the way till we pass out of this existence, all right? It's called memory. We call it memory. In fact, one of the major makers of these discs is called Memorex, all right? Because these are blank discs when we were born, and yet everybody has one. We don't know it. We're out there in front of the disc just trying to deal with all this information coming into us, collating it in whatever way we can, and just trying to get through this process, which is very foreign to us, called life. All right? Now, on that disc is everything that you experience. And it is location, location, location. Because what you believe to be true is very much determined by the location of your particular disc. All right? Even the word patriotism only has meaning depending on where that disc is. And one of the things that is common to everybody's disc, one, is that the sense of self is very fragile. Because as the data comes onto the disc, your belief in who you are is that disc. In fact, when people go into dementia or become Alzheimer's, it becomes very scary for those people and for those around them, because their sense of who they are disappears. Because their connection, their access to the disc is fuzzy and becomes loosened, and in the end becomes dementia, which means there is no relationship to the previous memory bank, and you're out there all alone. Which brings us to one of the things on that disc. That disc leads everyone to the belief that they are in fact unique and alone. Let me tell you, you may be unique, you're not alone, but that disc leads you to believe that. Why? Because the uniqueness of that disc tells you instinctively that you're different than your mother, father, sister, brother, child, enemy, friend, even the people who believe with you. Muslims all think they're different than the Muslim next to them. Christians believe they're different than the Christian next to them. Atheists believe that they're different than the atheist next to them. Each disc believes itself unique and different. And not only does it believe itself unique and different, it believes it's right. Right. Why? Because everything on that disc leads to the person, their beliefs. But he was an extraordinary person. And Bucky said this: there is the physical and the non-physical. And the non-physical, which is the metaphysical, it is the context of the physical. And I think you could, by a metaphor, it's like this. This is a series of discs, all right? It can be humanity, all right? Like this. All these discs. Let's say right now there's 5 billion on this, okay? All of humanity is in it. And everybody's perception of themselves is contained on and from the point of view of their specific disc. Be that as it may, there's a context of the disc, all right? This is what Bucky called metaphysical. This is what Bucky would call the universe, that which is greater than the disc, which gives rise to it, all right? Now, Bucky said there are two types of action here. Class 2. Class 2, Bucky says, is the definition of any action that comes from human endeavor. This qualifies as everything on these discs. All right? Then Bucky had another term, another type of action, Class 1. And Class 1 actions, according to Bucky, were the metaphysical. This is from the universe, what others call God. Bucky didn't want to use the word God because it was so loaded. Why is it loaded? Because everybody's disc has an extraordinarily deep-rooted feeling about what God is. Some deny it. They call them atheists. The ones who believe in, quote, God have all these different stories. I call them, they're religions, all right? I call them God in a box. All these people, all these cultures around the world have taken the concept of God, which is cause, all right, or class one, or the universe, and has a story about it, all right? Everyone has a different story. The American Indians, the Great Spirit, okay? The Jews, Jehovah, Yahweh. The Hindus, Shiva. All these, there's many, many gods, all right? And cause. Chinese, they have a very strange story. They don't even have a story about the creation, but they do have a metaphysics, all right? But whoever they are, everyone believes that their understanding of God is right, okay? And even those within the different religions will fight and kill over those definitions. The warfare in Sarajevo is basically interreligious, as was the warfare in Ireland, as is the warfare in the Middle East, as is the warfare in Afghanistan. We're thinking it's true, you know? So, but I said the world would be a lot better off if instead of saying I think, we use the words I guess. Sophisticated guessing is what passes off as academic thinking. And you know what my son said? He said, yeah, but instead of saying that, they say I know. Which belies why we shoot each other over differences on our disk. Nonetheless, the disk is part of all created physical reality. 5 billion of these, us, whatever we are, on this planet of time, each with a different disk. This is the context of that disk. This is what Bucky might call class one, if you couldn't see it, if it was non-physical, if it was the context of the disk. It's what the I Ching calls the void, the unmanifest. It's what the Hebrew Bible would say in the beginning was the Word. Before the world, before Alpha and the Omega. Out of that void, out of the nothingness came what? Certainly came the disk, ours, okay? And out of that, we began forming all these different worlds. Now, one of the primary things, and I went over this before, is that your belief on that disk is that whoever you are, if only you had enough power, this world that you have no control over, this world where whatever your pitches are about it, you don't control. And if you think you control it, well, you belong in an insane asylum.
There is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take. There is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take. There is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take.
That would effectively be a takeover of monetary policy by the Congress, a repudiation of the independence of the Federal Reserve, which would be highly destructive to the stability of the financial system, the dollar, and our national economic situation.
The Federal Reserve does not own any gold at all. We have not owned gold since 1934.
Now, guys, as you listen to this interview, I don't know if anything Karen says is true, but we know that everything coming out of our own government and the powers that be are lies.
Which is 90 to 95% accurate, is predicting that the corruption that I've been reporting is now going to be over, that a sufficient coalition has formed. And I've found out what that corruption is very precisely, because there's a group of mathematicians at the Federal Institute of Technology that in 2011 put out an article that identified what they called a network of global corporate control those two interfaces, they are really just one bank. And what they have done is they have taken the same directors and put on interlocking boards. So and they thought nobody would catch them at it. So what you have is you have one mega conglomerate, or I think the legal term is cartel, which has bought up 40% of the assets of the 43,000 companies that are traded on the capital markets, and they pull down 60% of the annual earnings of that group. And this group has, there's a concept called state capture, which is when there's a very powerful group like this banking cartel. They corrupt the government, and so the government, rather than serving the people, it serves that mega conglomerate. And so I've been meticulously documenting how that group moves through space, and so they are no longer a secret network, but they've come out in the open. And once they come out in the open, they're not viable. The other condition that they needed was they needed the support of the U.S. military, and that has dried up as well because they have done certain things.
What happened is that the banks decided that since there was going to be legislation anyway to control their industry, that they wouldn't just sit back and wait and see what happened and cross their fingers that it would be okay. They decided that to do what so many cartels do today, they decided to take the lead. And they would be the ones calling for regulations and reform. They like the word reform. And American people are suckers for the word reform. You just put that into any corrupt piece of legislation, call it reform, and people say, oh, I'm all for reform. And so they vote for it or accept it. So that's what they were doing. They decided we will reform our own industry. In other words, we will create a cartel, and we will give the cartel the power of government. We'll take our cartel agreement so that we can self-regulate to our advantage, and we'll call it the Federal Reserve Act. And then we'll take this cartel agreement to Washington and convince those idiots there to pass it into law. And that basically was the strategy. It was a brilliant strategy. Of course, we see it happening all the time.
State citizens have just been given a pack of lies. But when we're talking about pack of lies, let me just talk about a very big cover-up that is now also completely exposed. And that is whether the Constitution of the United States is in effect and what exactly happened to the Constitution. I had a debate in the American Bar Association Journal on that because on 1871, our Constitution was thrown out the door secretly, and a secret constitution was enacted by a corporation that called itself the United States, and the President of the United States was the chief executive, and Congress has not really been in session. It's been there, but it's under a declaration of emergency, which in 1933, when the United States was declared bankrupt, for all practical purposes, the U.S. Congress is just an appendage
ceremonial
because of this secret constitution and the fact that we're declared in emergency secretly without the Congress bothering to tell the citizens.
Well, the former director of the CIA, pretty much in charge at the White House at that point. I mean, you wound Reagan and scare the pants off him, and then Bush Sr. takes charge, only then to implement the Bush dynasty, which we've been suffering under ever since, the Bush-Clinton-Bush dynasty.
Right.
But anyway,
we're not going to suffer under that anymore. And what's going to happen is, have you seen, by the way, what the Parliament in the United Kingdom is about to do? They're about to impeach, what's his name? The guy that brought them the Iraq War.
Tony Blair?
Yeah. They've got a motion there to impeach him. You can impeach, in the United Kingdom, a past, that's what they call it, a past politician who is proven to have done criminal wrong. So all of these crooks that have been representing their own interests and the interests of that banking cartel are on notice that people are they're not taking that anymore. This banking cartel that thought it was going to be immune is not immune anymore. It's about to be declared bankrupt. Its paper currencies are about to be replaced by the gold that is in something called the Global Debt Facility, which is the world's gold that was put aside by Ferdinand Marcos for 50 years. So he was a lawyer, and he knew that after 50 years, you own that property clear. There's something called a statute of limitations. If you claim that you own something and you haven't managed to get control of it over it for 50 years, you don't own it anymore. And so that gold is now clean and free for humanity to use. And that's the gold that's going to be used to mint the currencies of all the countries.
Best 7% of it, so we can create more receipts for gold than we have, and we can collect interest on that because we'll loan that into the economy, and we'll charge interest on this money that we don't really have. And it's a pretty good gimmick, don't you think? And well, yeah, of course. And so that's how fractional reserve banking started, and now it's institutionalized, and they teach it in school. No one ever questions the integrity of it or the ethics of it. They say, well, that's the way banking works. And isn't it wonderful that we now have this flexible currency and we have prosperity and all of this sort of thing? So it all starts with this concept of fractional reserve banking. The trouble is with that is it works most of the time, but every once in a while, there are a few ripples that come along that are a little bit bigger than the other ripples, and maybe one of them is a wave, and more than 7% will come in and ask for their gold. Maybe 20% will come in, or 30%. And well, now the banks are embarrassed because the fraud is exposed. They say, well, we don't have your gold. What do you mean you don't have my gold? I gave it to you and put it on deposit, and you said you'd safeguard it. Well, we don't have it. We loaned it out. So then the word gets out, and everybody and their uncle comes and lines up for their gold, and of course they don't have it. The banks are closed. They have bank holidays, and the banks are embarrassed. They go out of business. People lose their savings, and you have these terrible banking crashes that were ricocheting all around the world prior to this time. And that's what caused the concern. One of the things that caused the concern of the American people, they didn't want that anymore. They wanted to put a stop to that. And that was the whole purpose, supposedly, of the Federal Reserve System, is to put a stop to that. But since the people who designed the plan to put a stop to it were the very ones who were doing it in the first place, you can not be surprised that their solution was not a very good one insofar as the American people were concerned. Their solution was to expand it. Not to control it, but to expand it. See, prior to that time, this little game of fractional reserve banking was localized at the state level. Each state was doing its own little fractional reserve banking system. Each state, in essence, had its own Federal Reserve. Central banks were authorized by state law to do this sort of thing, and that was causing all this problem. And so the Federal Reserve came along and said, well, no, we're not going to do this at the state level anymore because look at all the problem it's causing. We're going to consolidate it all together, and we're going to do it at the national level.
Be real, but as you mentioned, was it Yamashita's gold? There's much more at play. There's a hidden history. There's a history to this world that's been completely hidden from the people. And I think that when you talk about trillions of dollars in bonds, the reality may be that is the reality. Again, who would be crazy enough to counterfeit $6 trillion in bonds? Why would somebody...
Especially when you know that the bonds are they're trying to buy up the bonds at a discount. And if they were fake, then they wouldn't pay anything for them. No, I can show you the offers that they're scrambling to try to extinguish some of this debt because they are insolvent. And I have asked all of the countries of the world to declare this banking cartel bankrupt. And in the United States, we'll administer it under Chapter 11, which is to say that the bank is going to go on. We're not going to have unemployment of all the people in the banking system, but it's not going to be controlled by the banking cartel anymore. That banking cartel is going to be history in very short order. To getting a unilateral surrender of the United States. They're not up to having all of the citizens sit back and gently watch the Federal Reserve note crash. We are going to replace those Federal Reserve notes with these golden US dollars. And the country's going to do just great. Russia and Japan are going to be our allies along with Europe. Germany is no longer going to end up looking closer to Russia than to the United States. Right. We're all going to be working together as the allies that we really are, that are just being divided by the banking cartel. It's the banking cartel that's going down, not the United States.
The male polarity has been, since time immemorial, superior in terms of power, aggregate power over the feminine, which means it's basically suppressed the feminine polarity. Polarities are supposed to be equal, balancing out, creating in tandem. That's what the creation is. But what humanity has done is that it's shifted. Ever since the beginning, the male has been dominant over the female in all cultures. Now let me assure you, this is not a reflection of eternal truth. This is a reflection of Class 2 judgment that is coming to an end. Why? Because Class 1, the universe, God, is moving to rebalance his creation. And I'm telling you this knowing full well that most of the endemic imbalance on this planet now is validated by religion. Why? Because religion, which is man's view of Class 1, only takes place when people believe, when it coincides with their basic preconceived beliefs. And the most basic of all preconceived beliefs of all cultures around this planet was male up, feminine down.
Yes, but we have to be very clear that religion does have a lot to do with this, because the system of finance is one way to control people, and another way to control people is through misusing their religion and their religious affiliation.
It is spiritual. It is going to be a far better world than we've ever seen before. A balanced reality is something that we have never ever experienced. And for those of you who mourn the passing of the old age, so be it.